Body trembled and the freezing water bath wasn't moving, only his ears bare lit witching above the surface from the shore. Grayson froze. It wasn't a log, it wasn't a dog, it was a bobcat kitten, and it was drowning right in front of him. Lake was silent. Except for the sharp sound of splashes, weak, panicked Thecaton's head kept slipping below the surface, coming up slower each time. Grayson didn't hesitate. He dropped his fishing rod, kicked off his boots, and dove in the water, hit like knives, but there was no time to feel it. By the time reached the kitten, the little body was limp eyes, half-closed breath. Aluth. There was any breath at all, he pulled him to his chest, whispering through chattering teeth. Attering! Don't you die on Menot now. And with the kitten cradled against him, Grayson swam back to shore, fighting not just the current but through it, of a life that was slipping away. Grayson collapsed onto the shore, gasping for air. The kitten still clutched to hishes the tiny bobcat was soaked, his fur plastered tight to his fragile frame. He didn't move, not a cry, not a breath, nothing. Grayson tore off his jacket and wrapped the kitten inside, pressing him close to his own body for warmth. His shawls were shaking, part cold, part panish. Leaned in, trying to hear anything, a heartbeat. It was faint, almost not. There the kitten's mouth opened, just slightly. No sound came out as boat it witched once like a dying spark. Grayson pressed his forehead to the kitten's and whispered, "You're not giving up, you harm?" No car, no help. The woods were too far from town, so he ran, soaked, freezing, barefoot, clutching a bundle of wet, furent, fading life. His breath tore from his lungs, but he didn't stop, not until he reached the cabin, and even then he didn't pause to unlock the door, has slammed it open with his shoulder, and dropped to the floor, still holding Thecaton, as the fire crackled in Thecaton's. Grayson laid the kitten down on the old wool blanket in front of the fireplace. Cabin was dark, still waking from thick old silence of early morning, but the fire had kept a weak ember alive through night. He dropped to his knees and stoked it hard, shoving and dry logs, kindling, anything that would bring back heat. Sparks exploded upward. Thecaton didn't flinch. His tiny body was motionless, curled unnaturally on its side. Water dripped from his whiskers onto his fur, stuck in thin, shivering mats. Toe his skin, the fire cracked louder still. Kitten didn't stir. Grayson grabbed a towel, thick old, the one he kept fordering the dog that died last winter, and began drying the bobcat gently, but quickly, moving from his back down to his paws. The pads on his feet were like Isano color. No fight left. Come on, Grayson whispered. Come on, little guy. He checked the breath again, leaned close. There was something barely a rizabar, almost imperceptible, but he was lipping. Grayson ran to the kitchen, yanked opened the cabinet, and pulled down a dusty thermos, poured hot water into a rubber glove, and tied it shut. A makeshift heating pad. He set it against kitten's belly and covered him with another blanket. Then he sat, crossed his legs, waited, listened. Every few seconds, reached forward and touched Thecaton's ribs, felt for life. The minute scrawled. 30 passed, then 40, then an hour. Still no movement, no sound. Grayson sighs, stung from the heat and the helplessness. He leaned back against the will and closed his eyes, but didn't sleep. And then a sound so small he thought he imagined it a flutter like breath, catching. Then again, this time at which of the paw. Grayson leaned forward fast. The kitten's ear flicked barely. Hishes rose once, twice, then a whimper. No ta. Meow. Something raw, broken, but it wastes there. You're here, Grayson whispered, a smile breaking slowly across his face. You were still here. The fire blazed full now, casting warm light across the small living room. The storm outside pressed against the windows, but inside there was breath. There was heat, and for the first time since he pulled him from the water, Grayson believed the kitten might live. His storm outside grew louder, wind clawing at the edges of the old cabin like a wild thing trying to get in. Butte inside, everything had gone, still except slow, shallow breathing of the bobcat kitten, nestled beneath layers of towel sand wool. Grayson hadn't moved from Thefler. Hours had passed, but he stayed there, sitting cross-legged, watching, waiting. His eyes were fixed on the Rizian fall of the little body, every breath like a fragile thread, as if any gust from the world outside might break. If kitten stirred again, this time a paw pushed weakly against the blanket high size. blinked open slits of pale gold cloudy, and slow to focus, he didn't hiss it and growl, he just looked at Grayson confessed. Exposed vulnerable you medit? Grayson murmured the kitten tread-toe move, but his legs gave out beneath him. He collapsed into the towel, again breathing heavily from the effort Grayson reached for a bowl of warm goat milk he'd prepared earlier, and dipped a finger in. He touched it gently to Thecaton's lips. At first nothing but Thena flick of the tongue. Grayson exhaled tension in his chest. Cracking just slightly, he tried again. This time, Thecaton took a few tiny licks, slow and certain, but he was drinking you're a fighter, Grayson said softly, a stubborn little wild thing. He sat back and studied the creature curled in front of him, barely the size of a loaf, off-bred ears, too big for his face legs, langles and bones, but his breath had steadied, his eyes stayed open. A little longer now he was holding on Grayson-lined. His head back against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment. He hadn't planned on this. He wasn't prepared for it. No enclosures, no. Rahabjer, no experience with wildcats but none of that mattered. The kitten washer alive, and in that quiet are something. Changed. He wasn't just a wild animal anymore, not just a rescued there was. Something in the way he watched Grayson, unblinking the way he didn't flinch. When the man moved close, no fur, no fight, just trust it wasn't natural but it was real. Grayson looked back down at him and said, almost without thinking, you're not going anywhere, are you? Thecaton blinked slowly. Grayson smiled. Okay then. He paused then, added almost to himself, I guess we'll need a name. The next morning the storm had passed, leaving behind a glassy silence. No. Dusted the trees outside and smoke rolled from the chimney into the pale winter sky inside the cabin. The air was warm and smelled of firewood and old pine. The kitten was awake, barely boot awake. He lay curled in the nest off blankets. Eyes open, watching. His breathing was steady now, slower, his coated fluffed out slightly as it dried reeling spots along his legs and a white underside. He looked less like a soaked ghost, more like what he was, a baby bobcat who had somehow survived. Theme possible. Grayson entered, quietly holding a small bowl of warm milk mixed with a few crushed bits of chicken. He moved slowly, speaking softly, morning kid, set the bowl down and knelt beside him. The kitten lifted his head, just a little then too. Grayson, surprised, took a step forward, wobbly, unsure, but a step had passed his nose toward the bowl and began to eat slow, and clumsy milk dribbled from the side of his mouth. Anne had to stop after just a few laps. It's housed, but it was more than yesterday, Mac. More. Grayson smiled. That's it, her doing it. The kitten blinked at him, something calm in his gaze, no panic, no flinch. After he finished, Grayson sat nearby on the floor. He didn't touch him, not yet, but he stayed close, let him feel his presence, the warmth, the quiet safe to off this place, and then some a thing you next.
Happened. The kitten stood just 2 steps, and then he
lay down side Grayson's leg curled up precipice, small body against the denim of his jeans, and closed his eyes. Grayson froze, breath caught in his throat. This was a wild animal, a predator, but in Thatment, all he saw was a life that had coasted too. Trust him, I guess. It's you and me now, he said quietly. He reached out slowly and rested his fingers near the kitten's back, not touching just there. The kitten shifted slightly closer. Grayson smiled, the firelight dancing in his tired eyes. Whatever this was, whatever it became, it had already changed something in both of them, something real. By the 3rd day, Thecaton, Finn, as Grayson had started clinging him, was eating from his hand. His bites were still small, his jaw unsure a bit. He leaned forward, with growing strength, eyes alert now and hungry. Not just for food, but for life. Grayson spoke to him in a low voice, steady and slow, not because Finn understood the words, but because he understood the tone. By the end of Thuic, Finn could stand on all 4s. His legs wobbled, and every movement was careful, like the ground might fall away at any moment, but he followed Grayson step by step, room by room. Wherever he went, the little bobcat padded behind him like a silent shadow, never meowing, never whining, just always there. He slept near the fireplace, ate on a folded towel, watched birds through the window, but there was one thing that didn't change: water. It started with the faucet. Grayson turned it. His eyes widened. He backed away into the corner, body low, and trembling rain outside. Madahim paced, restlessly dripping boots. Madahim bolt a spilled glass of water on Thefler sent him scrambling behind Thekoch, breathing fast, eyes locked on Thepidale. Grayson tried not to push Treadnit to make noise when he filled Hiskadel, but he saw it. The memory still gripped him, even safe, even warm. Evan Olive Finn was still there in the Lakeen. The cold alone, he didn't whimper or cry. He just went still like a creature Aho had learned that motion invites danger. Grayson watched him one evening curled tight under the table after a few drops hit the floor, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of what had been into him. Someone hadn't just abandoned him. They tried to erase him, whatever you saw out. There, Grayson whispered from across the room, whatever you went through, you don't have to go through it again. But Finn didn't move. He just stared, head eyes glassy and distant, and Grace realized what this tiny wild soul had survived was more than most hearts could ever carry. It had been 2 weeks since Grayson pulled Finn from Thelic. The kitten was stronger. Now his movements, smoother muscles forming beneath his once wasted frame, he climbed into windowsills with ease betogantly. At dust mows in the sunbeams, ate full meals without hesitation, but the fear never fully left his eyes, not when it rained, not when the faucet dripped, not when he saw his own reflection in a bowl of water, and Grayson couldn't let it go. He needed to know, so one morning just after sunrise, he packed a thermos, zipped up his coat, and walked back to the edge of the lake where he had found Finn. The air was sharper here, colder, thuend, dragged across the water like a blade. The shore was quiet, frozen in memory. Grayson stepped carefully around Throck's eyes, scanning every inch off ground. Something in him needed proof that what he feared was real, and then he saw it half buried beneath frost-covered leaves. Fabric thickener of what looked like a mesh bag, heavy with dirt and drag marks thin and even. Running from the tree into Thleck's edge, Grayson knelt his chestite. Finn hadn't fallen in, he hadn't gotten lost, he'd been left tied. Begottomed like trash, the image communin. It is small body struggling, gagging, soaked fabric, tiny claws, clawing at. Nothing, lungs burning, heart pounding. Wasn't supposed to be found, he wasn't supposed to survive. Grayson clenched Theckard in his fist, staring out over the still water. It looked calm now, peaceful, but it had tried to take something it never deserved. To touch and Finn, he had clawed his way out of it, not because Asomion helped him, but because Harefuse, to go quietly grazing, stood slowly, the cold sinking Ginto, his bones. He looked back, toward Thetrail, the cabin just beyond the trees. I don't know who you were running from, he said under his breath. Boot Yar, not running anymore. The days grew longer, winter softened ath edges, and the first signs of early spring crept into the trees beyond. Thekabinfin had changed his legs. Once weak and shaking, were now sure he moved with purpose. Grace silent as smoke across Thuwooden. Flora's coat had thickened into a soft spotted armor, and his eyes, they were no longer cloudy. With fear they were sharp, focused, wild. He climbed a diger, now onto shelves, up onto thabins that stretched across the cabin ceiling. He watched the birds. Outside, not with curiosity, but instinct, purpose. Hugh is healing. But Grayson saw it every morning. Finn stood at the window, longer ears twitching toward the woods. Nose lifted to the air, something inside him had started to pull, and Grayson knew this was never meant to be permanent. Finn had survived because of him, but who wouldn't stay because of him? He was a Bobcat, creature of trees and stone and sky, not a living room, not a fireplace that night. Grayson sat beside him, legs stretched out in front of the hearth. Finn curled silently nearby. You're not meant to be here forever, are you? Grayson started building just beyond the cabin in the clearing near the tree-ine he constructed, a space part shelter, part threshold, a covered enclosure open to the woods. Food placed near the entrance, bedding made off in straw and burlap, a place to sleep, a place to go, a place to come back to. When it was done, he opened the door. Finn didn't rush out, he didn't bolt, he just stepped forward, quiet, calm, sure, and at the edge of the trees he stopped, turned there. Eyes met man and wild thing, no fear, no confusion, just something else, mething, like goodbye, and then Finn disappeared into the forest without a sound. Grayson stood there long after Thekode. Biting at his hands, he told himself, This was right that he had done what was best, that Finn needed freedom, but still. Quiet left behind was heavier than expected 3 days. Pascrasan kept the door open every morning, left food near the shelter, waited, but Finn did not return, not a print in the snow, not a shadow among the trees. Nothing. Thekabon felt different now, too. Quiet too still. Grayson caught himself listening. The soft thud of paws across Thefler, the rustle of movement near Thuendo, the low breath of a sleeping presence. Beside the fire, but their wazenly silence, he told himself. This was nature, that wild things are meant to go, but part of him still checked the window every hour, still listened for that familiar sound. The fourth night, just before dawn, Grayson woke without knowing we. There was no sound, no light, only the soft pressure of instinct. He got up, pulled on his coat, and stepped outside. The sky was pale with early morning frosts. The woods stood black and stillened. Then he heard it, a low rustle, earth clearing, then a shape not running, not hiding, just standing calm, poised just by in the line of trees. Finn, he was bigger, now somehow more present. His coat shone in the pale light, and his eyes reflected the early sun like twin shards of gold. They stared at each other. Neither moved then. Finn stepped forwards, low and deliberate. He didn't come to, door didn't cry or scratch. He simply circled the shelter once padded to Theflat's stoneware. Grayson had left food on, sat watching, waiting. Grayson didn't speak. Didn't move. This wasn't a reunion. It was something older, quieter. It was respect. Finn had chosen to return, not bow, because he had to, not because he waste-aimed, but because part of him remembered the warmth, the fire, the arms that didn't let go. He stayed for an hour that morning, then slipped back into the woods without a sound. In Grayson, he smiled. For the first time in days, because no one understood. Finn wasn't gone. He was simply free, and freedom, when built on trust, always finds its way home. Some say wild animals don't love that they serve, they adapt, but they don't feel the way we do. Grayson would never believe that again, because every few days, just before dawn, Finn would return, ever closer than a few feet, never sking for anything, but always watching, always present. Sometimes he'd rest near the edge of the shelter, eyes half-closed, breathing steady. Other times he'd lie in the clearing until the sun rose, then vanish back into the trees without a sound. And Grayson understood this way a bond that needed no leash, no cause, no spoken promise. It was choice. Finn had survived what should have ended him. He had been discarded, nearly drowned, left with nothing, but he chose to live in more than that. He chose to come back, not as a pet, not as a possession, but a something even rarer as family, because isn't always what we expects. Immediate, it's a heartbeat beside you in the silence. Sometimes it's a shadow that returns to the place where it was once saved, and sometimes it's a wild soul thought remembers you. If this story moved you, if you believe like we do that love and trust can cross even the wildest distance, subscribe to Hope and Infobecos. Here every heartbeat counts.